Good evening. My name is Kirsten Soderlin, and I'm the Associate Dean for Student and External Affairs at the Jepson School of Leadership Studies, and a member of the One Book, One Campus Committee. And so on behalf of both of those entities, I'd like to welcome you here this evening to the second program in this year's Jepson Leadership Forum, Game Changers, How Women Lead and Change the World. Before I introduce our guest this evening, I wanted to share with you that we will be live tweeting tonight and invite you to follow or join in the conversation using the hashtag #JepsonForum, all one word. And our Twitter handle is @JepsonSchool. I don't think I ever thought I would say those words publicly. Tonight, we're really fortunate in that we're being joined by Sheryl WuDunn, the first Asian American journalist to win a Pulitzer Prize, the best-selling co-author of Half the Sky, and a business executive. Currently, WuDunn is a senior managing director at Mid-Market Securities, an investment banking boutique serving growth companies in the middle market, including companies founded and run by women. She's also president of Triple Edge, a social investing consultancy, and a senior fellow at Yale University's Jackson Institute for Global Affairs, where she teaches a course on global affairs with a specific focus on China's economic development and its global role. Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, the 2011-2012 One Book, One Campus selection for this year, also a New York Times bestseller, explores the challenges facing women around the globe. WuDunn also helped launch the Half the Sky multimedia effort to create a thoughtful, effective philanthropic strategy that includes an online social action campaign, a documentary series, and a television special. With her husband, Nicholas Kristof, she has co-authored 2 other best-selling books about Asia, Thunder from the East, and China Wakes. WuDunn won a Pulitzer with her husband for covering China, along with the Dayton Literacy Peace Prize for Lifetime Achievement. She has won other journalism prizes, including the George Polk Award and Overseas Press Club Awards. WuDunn was honored for Half the Sky in 2010 with the Beacon Award from the White House Project, a nonpartisan organization that seeks to advance women's leadership in all communities and sectors. And she is a judge for the U.S. Department's Secretary's Innovation Award for Women and Girls Empowerment. WuDunn graduated from Cornell University, earned an MBA from Harvard Business School, and an MPA from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School. She lectures in the United States and abroad on economic, political, and social topics related to women in the developing world, China, and the emerging markets. Recently, she spoke about China to Al Gore and his group of colleagues, including Sir David King, the chief science advisor to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. We're pleased to have her with us here tonight, and I'm pleased to introduce you to Sheryl WuDunn.
Well, that's a great welcome. What a great welcome. I guess I can go home now. I haven't said a word. Good evening. I am so delighted to be here. I had a very interesting ride on the way to the university. And this morning I was hovering around up 30,000 feet. And there was this white blanket of fog. I don't know how many of you were underneath the fog. Probably all of you were underneath the fog. And so I'm so glad, because then the sky parted and I was able to be here with you, and so we're here tonight. So I'm really delighted to be here. So I want to take you on a trip, a journey to some places that I hope some of you haven't been to before. But before I start, I want to get a feel for where some of you have traveled. So how many of you have traveled to, let's say, Tanzania? Okay, great. How many of you have been to Pakistan? Oh, okay, we have a very well-traveled group here. Okay, we're going to start off in my favorite place, one of my favorite places, and that's China. This photo was taken 2 weeks ago. That boy, on the top of my husband's shoulders actually is a freshman at college with some of you, so you know how old that photo is. But this is China, and so those of you who have been to China have been to Tiananmen Square. You also know that that's not the real China, right? I didn't come here to tell you about Tiananmen Square. So let me take you to the real China. Okay. This is Dai Manju. Dai Manju was 12 years old at the time the story starts. She lived in a little hut that was 2 hours from the nearest road, and this hut had no running water, no electricity, no refrigerator. They had no wristwatch, no radio, no television, of course. And she and her parents and her 2 brothers and great aunt shared this great splendor with a very large pig. So Dai Manju was about to enter the 6th grade, and see, her parents had to pay these $13 in school fees every year. So they thought, well, gee, you know, Dai Manju is going to be spending most of her life in the rice paddies. She's going to be, you know, helping out with household chores. Why on earth would we want to spend $13 a year on her for her to continue going to school? So they pulled her out of 6th grade. It just turns out that Dai Manju was the best pupil in her grade. So she was just devastated. And, you know, so she still made the 2-hour trek to the school every day just to, you know, hang around, hopefully get some tidbits of information. And so we wrote about her in the New York Times, and all of a sudden, there was a flood of donations coming in. Mostly checks for $13. Yeah. New York Times readers are very generous in tiny amounts. But then there was a money transfer for $10,000. And we were just overjoyed. We thought, oh my goodness, this is just wonderful. Well, we took the money. We gave it to that man in the photo, who is the principal of the school. And we then, you know, saw that he took the money, he renovated some of the classrooms. He was just overjoyed. He said, I can actually give scholarships to not only Dai Manju, but also her female classmates if they work hard to stay in school. And he started, you know, rebuilding, had plans for renovating the entire school. So Dai Manju was able to finish 6th grade, and at the end of the 6th grade, we thought we would give a progress report to the donor. So we called up the donor, and we said, sir, hi, we just wanted to thank you for your generosity. You have no idea how far $10,000 goes in poor rural China. There was a pause at the other end of the line. He said, I didn't give $10,000. I gave $100. As good investigative journalists, we spotted a problem. Well, you know, there was a problem. It turns out that there was a bank clerk who had a slight problem with decimal points. Yeah. Actually, we were convinced that he was later transferred to the Department for Subprime Mortgages. But then seriously, we had this problem because we actually, you know, didn't know what to do. And we thought about this, and we decided to do something that, for those of you journalism majors, please, I hope you don't follow this as an example. It's not exactly the best thing to do. We actually called up a senior official at Morgan Guaranty Trust Bank. It was the bank at the time, and if you notice, it's no longer around. But we called up a senior official there, and we said, sir, you know, we're doing a follow-up story, and on the record, we'd like to know, are you going to send your bankers out to Dai Manju's school to take your money back and throw all of the girls out of school again? Well, he didn't miss a beat, and he said, you know, under the circumstances, on the record, we are delighted to make a donation of the difference. So there we had it. we had a wonderful situation where Daimanju not only finished 6th grade, she went on to middle school, and her female classmates all went on through middle school. They went on to high school, and then they went to vocational school for accounting. Daimanju studied accounting, and then she went down to the southern province of China, Guangdong province, to find a job. She helped her female classmates find a job as well. What we had was a natural experiment in girls' education. It is very rare to get an exogenous investment in girls' education. And so over the years, we saw what had happened to Daimanju, and we saw how she broke out of this cycle. So what she did was, she got this job, she started saving up some money, she started sending some money back to her parents, they started saving up too, and then pretty soon they had enough money to build their own house. They built their own house this time with electricity, with running water. They got a bicycle. They got wrist watches for everybody. They, got television. The pig moved outside. And the entire village was seeing the same thing because all of Daimanju's girlfriends were sending money back. It really broke them out of this cycle of poverty and put them into a virtuous cycle. And that basically brings me to one of the two major tenets of Half the Sky. It's not so much when you're talking about rural education, education of girls in the countryside where Daimanju lived, it's not so much there that success depends upon how high your IQ is. It really is what chromosomes you have. And so that's why we think that one of the really important challenges of this century is gender inequity. It's the moral challenge of our time, we think. In the same way that into the 19th century, slavery was the paramount moral challenge, and in the 20th, it was totalitarianism, we think the cause of our time now is gender inequity. It's the brutality that so many people around the world face because of their gender. So some of you might be thinking, oh my goodness, what an exaggeration. Hyperbole, right? Right? Come on, admit it, right? Well, let me ask you this question. How many of you think there are more men or more women in the world today? How about a poll? How many of you think there are more men in the world today? Okay, a few hands. How many of you think there are more women in the world today? The majority, okay. Well, you know something, the majority, you're actually wrong. There are more men in the world today, and that's what is amazing. So, for several reasons. If you look at this, I'm sorry for the photographs, but that is a girl. She's in a feeding center in Ethiopia. The entire feeding center was filled with girls like her. What happens is that when there are scarce resources like food, she doesn't get the food. What's remarkable is that that girl, in her family, the boys were just fine. So the discrimination takes place to that degree within the same family. In a place like India, babies between 0 and 1 year of life, boy and girl babies survive at the same rate. Often they're fed by the breast, and the breast shows no son preference. But babies between 1 and 5 years, the girl babies have a 50% higher mortality rate than the boys. So how is that? Well, a lot of it is, they don't get the vaccinations because it costs money to vaccinate your child, and so the boys will get it. And, what commonly happens is that if the boy gets sick, he's rushed off to the clinic. If the girl gets sick, it's, well, let's see how she is tomorrow. So they have a higher mortality rate than the boys do. To the point where, if you add up all of these numbers, and demographers have done this, very, very serious demographers, including Amartya Sen, who pioneered this research, and he won a Nobel Prize for his whole body of work. But he and his colleagues discovered that in the current population, there are anywhere between 60 million and 100 million missing females in the current population. That's what the discrimination has brought about. So they're missing in the population, not just from situations like this, or from what happens in India, but also maternal mortality. A lot of young girls get pregnant and they can't carry to term, or they die at childbirth. And also there is, partly because of the sonogram, there is sex-selective abortion, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. So, but it isn't just this that we think this is the major challenge. Let's put aside the morality of this. Let's just take out the right and wrong of it all. And if you just look at this from a purely practical level, just, from a sense of the pragmatic, we still think that one of the most effective ways to fight poverty and to fight terrorism is to educate girls all the way to adulthood and bring them into the formal labor force. Basically, it's education and jobs. It's school and jobs. You all here know the schools part, and a lot of you are going to enter into the jobs part. But those are the two most important facets of the problem. And so, for instance, how does focusing on women and girls help fight poverty? Well, actually one of the most fundamental things about educating girls is that if they do carry their education through to a moderate level, even if it's elementary school or if it's high school, and hopefully if it is, college, a woman, when she is educated, tends to get married later on in life. She tends to have kids later on in life, and she tends to have fewer kids, and those kids that she has, she tends to educate in a more enlightened way. So what that means is that fewer kids, and overpopulation, we have just hit 7 billion people in this world. Overpopulation is one of the most persistent contributors to poverty. I was in Haiti about a year ago, and I met a woman who had 11 kids. She actually had 13, 2 of them died, but she had 11 children, and when we met those kids, they hadn't eaten for 2 days. So she clearly can't feed them, and her husband was really kind of an itinerant husband. He wasn't around when we were there, and she said he occasionally comes. If he has money, he gives her money to buy food, but she doesn't have time to have a job. She's looking after her kids. So it just is, it's really, at the most pragmatic level, it has to do with population. The second reason has to do with kind of what I call the dirty little secret of poverty, and it's that, poverty isn't just that you take home very little income. It also is that how you spend that income. And so in poorly educated households, when both the father and the mother are not well educated, they tend to spend it very poorly. And that has consequences. So for instance, when they have done research that shows what happens when the father controls the spending versus the mother controlling the household spending, they have discovered that when the father controls the spending, there's this big bucket that tends to go to a combination of cigarettes, drinking, prostitution, and for some reason, elaborate festivals. I think they want to show off. I mean, they want to contribute to these festivals. When the mother controls the purse strings, it tends to have more of that bucket more of that money going into education. Because generally when the father controls it, only like 2% goes to education and healthcare. And mothers tend to spend more on healthcare, nutrition, and education. So, that's just interesting research. Obviously, it's among people who are not very educated themselves. So they're just acting on instincts. And the third reason really has to do, well, it's kind of what Bill Gates had to say when he was touring Saudi Arabia one time, and he was speaking to an audience very much like you, only there was this, right here where we have the aisle, there was a physical barrier, and on one side was women who were veiled, and on the other side was men, and so that was 2/3 of the room. So there's a physical barrier, and they were covered. So someone from this part of the room, a man got up and said, "Mr. Gates, we have here in Saudi Arabia a goal to be one of the top 10 countries when it comes to technology. Do you think we'll make it?" And Bill Gates, as he was staring out at the audience, said, if you're not fully utilizing half the resources in your country, there's no way you will get anywhere near the top 10. So, here, Bill of Arabia. but I passed by this. You know, the other really important thought is that women really aren't the problem, which is the way we often have thought of this issue. Oh, what a problem that they're not educated, the girls and women, and, you know, they're the victims. But, you know, they really are part of the solution, too. You know, girls and women can be part of the solution alongside men. And I say this only because men have always thought to be part of the solution, but now we should think about women and girls being part of the solution alongside men and boys as well. So what are some of the challenges? What are some of the specific challenges facing women and girls around the world? And so I would have to say the top issue, and I know some of you are very familiar with this, is sex trafficking. And, you know, we call it sex trafficking. I know that there are some of you students who have studied this issue. In fact, I was not able to meet some of you for lunch today, and so I hope some of you students are here. By the way, can I just get some of you to raise your hand or stand up? Those of you who were supposed to come here supposed to see me for lunch? Well, I hope well, thanks. I'm sure that some of you will be the future leaders on this issue. So I do hope that you'll come by to the reception afterwards and ask me your questions that you didn't get to ask. But I know that you have studied sex trafficking. And we call it sex trafficking, but let me tell you what really happens. So often a girl is kidnapped. She could be anywhere, 12, 13, even younger. I've heard of situations 10 years old, 9 years old. She's kidnapped. She's sold to a brothel. Not by her family, although sometimes that happens on rare occasions, but she's usually kidnapped and, you know, sold to a brothel. And then she's forced to work at the brothel 7 days a week, long, long hours. She's not paid a dime, and she often isn't even fed that much because they don't want her to get fat. You know, it's kind of like slavery. I mean, it really is. And it's almost like sex slavery. I mean, it really is quite horrific and appalling. You know, my husband and I really understood this intellectually, but we didn't understand it viscerally until we met Long Pros. So Long Pros is someone who lives in Cambodia. Again, at 12 or 13, she was kidnapped and she was sold to a brothel. And, you know, she got pregnant twice and she had an abortion twice. And the second time, she was just feeling so miserable. And the brothel owner, who was a woman, said, get back to work. So Long Pros was just feeling miserable. She resisted, and the brothel owner gouged out her eye. I mean, this is horrific, and I'm sorry to raise this, but it really shows the kind of situations, the bondage that they're in. And luckily, Long Pros was able to escape with the help of another wonderful woman, Somali mom, some of you know her. And so one you know, bright note is that when Secretary Clinton went to Cambodia, she actually met with Long Pros. And so Long Pros has a photograph with Secretary Clinton. I don't even have that, so I think that's a great thing for Long Pros. But it really is pretty, you know, a devastating thing that happens. And, you know, there are some other comparisons to the time of slavery. So if you look at the numbers, for instance, at the peak of the slave trade in the 1770s and 1780s, there were maybe 80,000 slaves brought from Africa to the New World each year. Now, and these, you know, numbers on both time periods are really hard to come by, but the State Department roughly estimates that across international borders, the number of people trafficked across international borders in each year is about 800,000. And that's just across borders. There's a lot that goes on within borders. Long Pros didn't cross any borders. It was Cambodia, Cambodia. And so the numbers, the estimates can actually, they do go up much higher. Some people have much higher estimates. So 10 times, we have a you know, 10 times greater number of people involved in this issue. And the second thing is that if you look at the value of a slave during the time of slavery, if you look at it in today's terms, the slave was worth about $40,000 in today's terms. So that's real economic value. So in the self-interest of the owner, the slave owner is going to really, you know, treat that person rather carefully because he's got real economic value at stake there. These girls can be sold, bought and sold for about $200 to $300. So what that means is that they're actually disposable. So you could damage a long pros because there's lots of others who you can have for a pretty low price. So that's why it's even, in some ways, more insidious. It's really rather insidious. The second topic, I would say, has to do with maternal mortality. Some of you are studying global health, and so I think you're familiar with what goes on with maternal mortality. I mean, childbirth in this part of the world, in the US and in Europe, is just a wonderful, glorious event. In a place like Niger, 1 in 7 women can expect to die sometime during their lifetime from childbirth. It's really quite remarkable. So a couple of years ago, there were some statistics that showed that 1 woman dies every minute somewhere in the world today. There were some recent survey data that showed, I think it was a year ago and earlier this year, that we had confirmation, that showed that now a woman dies every minute and a half. So that's a really big progress, but we have a much farther way to go in order to really solve the problem. And it's not as though this is rocket science, really, right? We know what it takes to have safe childbirth. It's just that these women have 3 strikes against them. They are poor, they are rural, and they're female. And so for every woman who dies in childbirth, there are 20 who survive, but with injury. And one of the most devastating injuries is obstetric fistula. How many of you have heard of obstetric fistula? I know it's a mouthful. Oh, great. Okay, there's a number of you. So you know that it's just this horrific injury. I mean, it's really a rupture of the bladder, and so the woman is left incontinent. She can't control herself. Let me show you the story of Mahabuba. Mahabuba was 13 years old at the time when she was married against her will, and she got pregnant against her will. And so she ran off to the bush to have the baby. She's very young. She didn't know what was going on. And she ended up having obstructed labor. Her physical body was very, very immature. And the baby died, and she ended up with a fistula. So the villagers actually didn't know what to do with her. And beyond that, she was incontinent. She had a fistula. She basically stank. And so they thought that she was cursed. So they puzzled over what to do. And finally, they decided. They took a hut at the very edge of the village, and they put her in the hut. They ripped off the door so that at night the hyenas would get to her. That night, she found a stick in the hut, and she fought off those hyenas all night. And the next morning, she knew that in the nearby village that there was a foreign missionary. If she could just get to him, he could save her. And so she had some internal damage, and so she couldn't really walk very well. So she crawled. She crawled, and again at night, again to avoid the hyenas, she climbed up the trees and spent the night in the trees. We later found out that this village was 30 miles away. I mean, she's made of steel. She landed half dead on the doorstep of this foreign missionary. He took one look at her, knew exactly what had happened. He rushed her off to the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital. She was repaired in a $300 operation. And, clearly she's made of steel. This woman, I mean, is amazing. They also saw that she was clever. They actually made her a nurse's aide in the hospital. So now she is paying back in droves what someone gave to her. She is helping saving the lives of just hundreds and thousands of girls who are in her situation as well. So she really is part of the solution, not the problem. Her colleague, Mamitu. If you look closely, Mamitu had the same situation that Mahabuba had. And if you look closely at what Mamitu is doing, I don't know if you can tell, she's actually doing a surgery. So Mamitu was very interesting in that she, after she was recovering from the operation, they noticed that she had really agile fingers. So they said, oh, well, why don't you start training and doing the surgeries? And then she became the top trainer surgeon, which meant that the new doctors who come, the new educated doctors who come to the hospital, she trained them in how to do the fistula surgeries. Well, what's remarkable about Mommy Two is that she was illiterate. She couldn't read or write. And yet she was teaching educated doctors how to do the surgery. And so finally, after just being mortified with embarrassment at not being able to read or write, she enrolled herself in school, and the last we heard she was at a 3rd grade reading level, which is pretty remarkable that this woman is part of the solution, not the problem. So I've talked a lot about some of the really challenging aspects of this issue. Let me talk about some of the solutions. And there are solutions that some of you also know about. Basically, it's education that I referred to earlier, and it's jobs. So how do you create jobs? It isn't easy. There is one aspect that I will mention about this, and that would be microfinance, which is basically helping, helping women get access to capital at the micro level in tiny, tiny amounts. And when it works well, and there is no silver bullet here, but when it works well, it can really be transformative. So let me tell you about Saima. So Saima lives in a village outside of Lahore, Pakistan. She was miserable at the time. Her husband was unemployed and he was very, very frustrated. So he was taking his, frustrations out on her by beating her up every day. And so Saima, when she had her second daughter, remember the kind of community she lives in, second daughter, the mother-in-law went to her son and said, I think it's time for you to get another wife because Saima's never going to bear you a son. Like it's her fault. But so Saima was beside herself. And it turns out, just at that time, that there was a micro-lending group in the village that gave Saima a $65 loan. What would you do with a $65 loan? Well, Saima decided to start an embroidery business. So she started embroidering, and she gave her stuff to the merchants who sold her stuff, and then they came back and asked for more. She would embroider some more and give it to the merchants, and they would sell it and come back for more. So pretty soon, they started asking Saima for more embroidery than she could do herself. So she started hiring a couple of her friends. Pretty soon, Saima had 30 women in the village working for her. And when she had all this embroidery product that needed to be transported from the village to the marketplace, she needed someone to help her transport that product, so she hired her husband. And so now they are in partnership together. She does the sourcing and the production, and he does the marketing and distribution. They are the local tycoons. They have definitely not only elevated the economic output of their own household, but also of the entire village. And the village now is really a major contributor to the region. So it really can work when it becomes a virtuous cycle. And that's what Saima has done. And by the way, Saima now has 3 daughters. But you know something? They are all at the top of their class. And in fact, her daughter is tutored in every single subject. Saima knows how important education is. So that's the second solution, education. And I've hinted at education before with Daimanju, but education is extremely powerful. And you all know here, you're at an educational institution, and you know that it really can change your mind, open your mind, lead you to new ways. It really is a ladder out of poverty. In fact, Larry Summers, when he was the chief economist of the World Bank in the 1990s, he actually said that it very well may be that the highest return on your investment in the developing world is in girls' education, from Larry Summers. So it's really a powerful, I wouldn't say antidote, but it is a powerful salve when it really works well. Let me tell you about how it really can work very well. So this is Beatrice Bira. Beatrice lives in Uganda, near the Congo border, a very, very poor area. And, when she was 9 years old, she hadn't yet gone to a single day of school because her parents, again, like Daimanju's parents, said, oh my goodness, why would we spend any money on her? She's going to be lugging water every day and doing household chores. what a waste of money. So that she hadn't gone to school. It just so happens that there was a group in Connecticut called the Neantic Community Church of Connecticut. They made a donation to an organization based in Arkansas called Heifer International. Heifer sent a couple of goats to Africa, and one of them ended up with Beatrice's parents. So the goat had twins and started producing milk, and so they diverted some of that milk and started selling it on the marketplace. And they started getting cash for it. And then they started accumulating cash for it, so much so that they actually said, my goodness, we have enough money, we can send Beatrice to school. So Beatrice was delighted. You know, she had to start school with the 6-year-old in first grade, but no matter. In fact, she rocketed to the top of her class. She stayed at the top of her class in elementary school, and then in middle school, and then in high school. And she scored brilliantly on the high school examinations, the national examinations, so that she became the first person in her village to come to the US on scholarship and study on scholarship. So about 2.5 years ago, Beatrice graduated from Connecticut College. You know, on the day of her graduation, she said, you know something? I am the luckiest girl alive because of a goat. And what's also really interesting about Beatrice is that then she did some graduate work. She was working with the Millennium Project and Jeffrey Sachs, and she's giving back. She really wants to study economic development so that she can go back to her country and help that area develop economically. So she's, again, you know, part of the solution, not the problem, that she's, you know, creating a virtuous cycle out of a vicious cycle. So, you know, it really can work. But you know something? It doesn't always work out this way. I need to give you a reality check that, you know, helping people is very, very hard. There are books written criticizing, you know, giving aid, and there's this book, you know, by Bill Easterly, you know, criticizing aid. There's another book called Dead Aid. I mean, it is hard. And I think the criticism is, to some degree, it is fair. You have to improve. But we don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater. We think that you just learn from the mistakes and you continuously improve, just as they do in the business world, I mean, the corporate world. It's, you know, tinker with it, improve it, and continue on, continuous improvement. You know, it is hard that there are projects that fail that give development aid sort of a bad rep. There are surveys that show that water well projects, in a lot of these places in Africa, they need just water wells just to have safe water. Half of them a year later have failed. A part, you know, gets missing or broken and no one knows how to repair it. You know, when I was in Zimbabwe, this village chief was taking us around his village. He wanted to raise money for secondary school. And so, you know, there was some construction over there. And I sort of said to him, well, what's that construction? And he kind of, you know, mumbled and, you know, shooed me away. And it turns out that that was a failed irrigation project. And then just a few yards away was a failed chicken coop project. I mean, who knows what happened? Maybe the chickens all died one year from some disease and no one else wanted to put their chickens there in the coop. So things do happen, but you know, we are learning. So for instance, we used to send, lots of people used to send their old bicycles out to people in the developing world. Wow, you know, instead of having Daimanju, you know, walk 2 hours to school every day, you know, if she had a bicycle, then she would get there much quicker. Well, what would happen is that they'd send the bicycles out, and then at some point the bicycle gets stolen by someone else in the village, or it breaks down, and so then it's sitting there forever. So they now realize that when they send a bicycle out, they send it out to the entire village, so each family gets a bicycle, no one's stealing it, and they send out a fixer kit and designate one person in the village to be the bicycle fixer. So you employ someone, and you also get the bicycles fixed when they break down. So, you know, we are learning. You know, it takes a while, but we are learning. So it really is important, though, because these little changes take a lot of effort. And, you know, I really think it takes more than a village to help out. It really sort of takes a movement to really bring about this kind of change, and each one of you can help. I mean, it does get overwhelming. It's, oh my goodness, this is a huge problem, and there's so many people in the developing world. I mean, when you think about 60 million to 100 million missing women, 60 million women. I mean, that's, the size of, the UK or Germany. I mean, just think about what the economic power in that could be. It can get overwhelming to think about how to change all that. But I am reminded of a Hawaiian parable. And it's a story of a young boy's on the beach. This is Hawaii, after all. And it's just littered with starfish. And so he picks up one starfish, he throws it into the water, picks up another starfish and throws it into the water. And then all of a sudden comes a man who looks at the boy, looks at the beach littered with starfish, and he says, "Boy, look at all these starfish. You can't possibly make a difference." And the boy looks at the man, picks up another starfish and throws it back in the water and says, "It made a big difference to that one." So that's, I think, what keeps us going. But it does take a movement to clear away all the starfish and throw them back in the water. And so then the question is, what's in it for you? Why should you care? Very fair question. And to that I have two things to say. The first is that there are very few things in life that can actually change your level of happiness. Once you have all of your economic needs satisfied, which all of us here in the room do, there are very few things that can actually elevate your set point for happiness. One of those things is contributing to a cause larger than yourself. And the second thing, the last thing I'll close on, is it's a story of an aid worker in Darfur. This was a woman who saw things that no human being should see. And throughout her time, she was strong, she was steadfast, she never broke down. And then she came home on Christmas vacation and was in her grandmother's backyard. She saw something that made her break down in tears. What that was a bird feeder. Here was a woman who had seen babies thrown into bonfires because of the color of their skin. And she realized that she had the great fortune of being born in a land where we take security for granted, where we not only can feed and clothe and house ourselves, but even provide food for wild birds so that they don't go hungry in the winter. And she realized that with that great fortune comes great responsibility. And so, you, me, like her, we all have won the lottery of life. The question is, how do you discharge that responsibility? So, here's the cause. Join the movement. Feel happier and help save the world. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm actually happy to take questions. I don't know if there are even mics or... How about some of the students that I didn't get to see? Would you like to ask some questions? Great.
You know, I believe that we are all interconnected, and that it's not just an issue that we're going to help somebody that's downtrodden, but as we are, you know, we live in this rich country, seemingly, but I'm reminded of Napoleoni, I've forgotten her first name, is an economist, an Italian economist, and she writes about rogue economics and how Our economic system is out of control, and I guess you all are seeing it. But she made a really interesting comment. It was actually a quote by a man who was on the Politburo in Russia. And he said, you know, when Russia fell in the 80s, when, you know, glasnost, whatever, he said, when the wall came down on the heads of the women, because women suffered the most economically with the economic system failing. And I believe that that kind of stuff can happen here. And it's an interconnected thing. And we as women, we are a solution to the problem. There's a new book out now by Dan Abrams called Man Down. And he talks about why, he said something like, why women make the best hedge fund managers, cops, blah, 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 and there's a whole list, and almost everything else. We have been neglected throughout history. Our voice has not been heard, but we can balance this equation.
Okay, so it sounds like you're Occupy Richmond, right?
I've been doing some other things.
Okay. You know, and I don't know enough about the Italian economists that you refer to, but, you know, yeah, let's come up with some solutions. I mean, I think that that's really what we're trying to do with, you know, propelling all of you in your spheres of influence. Because, you know, my husband and I were just kind of the messenger. We really thought hard about how to articulate the message so that people can learn more about it, about some of these issues. And so we're hoping that people in your own spheres of influence, your areas of expertise, you can do something with it and do something that you know that you can contribute to help and bring about change. So thanks a lot for that.
Hi, thank you for your knowledge. Two questions. First, how do we get rid of all the men? That would be a simple solution.
No.
And I guess a more practical solution is, how do we change men's values and the women's values who go out and have spending sprees on pedicures and can't pay their rent? So how do we change, seriously, men's values?
Okay, so let me actually, that's a good occasion. Thank you for raising this issue. You know, it really isn't just a men versus a woman's thing. It isn't. It's a society's culture and a society's attitude. And so it takes men and women working together to bring about this change. I mean, that's why Nick and I wrote this together, a man and a woman writing this together, because it isn't just a women's thing. And the reason is that what's happening, as you know, with Long Cross that I mentioned, it was the brothel owner who was a woman who actually was perpetrating that horrific action. So it's not just a women's thing. It really, a women's versus a men's thing. It really is, you know, people who are just raised on certain social values and they're not really trying to penetrate or change those social values. And that's what we have to bring about a change in. So it's not just men's values, it's women also who have these, you know, values that they're perpetrating as well. And so I think we need to come up with greater solutions, and each culture, of course, is different. You know, what happens in the U.S. is different from what happens in the Soviet, in Russia, which is what's, you know, happening differently in Cambodia. And so, you know, in part education, changing people's outlooks and views on life, that's important. It also is at the very practical level. I mean, how do you bring about change that involves both men and women trying to educate their boys and girls in a way that they can work alongside each other and, you know, not think that there's a men's thing versus a women's thing. There's really just, you know, let's work together, and we have to raise our children to be really fully functioning and people who are contributing to, you know, society. So thanks for raising the issue, because it's really, really important.
My question really is, obviously you've come into this life of where you are part of the solution and you've reached so many people through your research and your books. What is it that sparked that in you? What gave you that passion? And what has been the best inspiration for you? And what can you tell other women who want to be as inspirational as you have been?
Oh, well, you know, really what I'm doing is passing it along, because I have been so inspired by women in the field who we wrote about. And I'm just passing it on to you, so you will then pass it on to someone else. So please, now it's in your hands. Seriously, I mean, the stories that we tell of the women in the book are real people who we saw who were doing such courageous things that, you know, I don't know that I could do it if I were in their shoes. So for instance, Somali Mom. Somali Mom helped rescue Long Pros from the brothel. But Somali Mom isn't just sort of a philanthropic woman. She, with a lot of money, she actually used to be in one of those brothels. She used to be, she was, sold to the brothel, and she was forced to live there, and she escaped, thankfully. And then, instead of running off to France, where her person she married was from, and living the good life, she decided, no, I'm going back there, and I am helping all the other women that I know to escape from their brothels. And so that's what she did. And to the point where she has now made it such a mission, on her part, that she's come to the United States, she's really broadcast her issue, and she has also highlighted the issue of sex trafficking in our own communities, help Americans see what's going on in their own communities, to the point where a year ago, maybe a few months ago in New York City, the Bloomberg administration announced that they were launching this anti-trafficking campaign with Somali Mom. So if you can have a poor, uneducated girl who spent most of her life in a brothel, working alongside the Bloomberg administration to help launch anti-trafficking in New York City, then I know you can do a lot more.
Hey, sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you, thanks, yes, let's go here. I know I'm favoring that side, unfortunately, I'm sorry, thank you.
Thank you again for talking, it was fantastic. When it comes to things like microfinance organizations and just, I guess, any sort of social enterprise, this is a huge global world. How would you, what recommendations do you have for people trying to figure out where we should send our money? Not everyone can go out and actually see firsthand what an organization is like. So how do you recommend finding a solid organization? Yeah,
that's a really good question. It's hard to answer that. I think what basically we have sort of settled on is the best way to do it is, each one of you has, comes from a different background, has a different history, has a different past, and has different things that motivate you. And so you have to find an issue among the whole issues that we've laid out. Find an issue that really speaks to you, that you think is just so horrific based on what your past is, and then find a part of the world that you care about. Some people care more about Uganda, others might really care about Afghanistan, others might think, well, Cambodia is the place that they want to help out. Just choose that part of the world that you want to focus on, and then find an organization that fits those criteria, and then do it with some friends, because that will elevate the level of inquiry that you have about it. You'll be able to discuss it and chat with your friends about it, and you'll come up with ideas and things about what to do, or maybe you'll make a trip together, because you could even do a trip locally. I mean, there are a lot of these issues that exist here at home in the US, and you can make a very local trip to see some of this happening. Sex trafficking actually is happening in the US too. So you can talk to some victims of it and find out about how you can help them. And it'll just be more interesting if you do it with a group of people. So thanks. I hope, good luck to you. Where is the microphone?
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here. You're very inspiring. I have an organization based here in Richmond, and we have built and we continue to operate a secondary school in South Sudan. And we're really excited because 25% of our student body is girls.
Oh, that's amazing.
And we're super excited about that, and we're working really hard to keep them. One of the things that we're offering, we have university-educated teachers from Uganda that we employ. And one of the courses that we offer after school is gender equity through education. And we're expanding the minds of the girls, and we're really excited about that. But one of the things that we're finding is that the girls are beginning to really stand up to their families. In South Sudan, one of the biggest issues facing girls and not getting their education is because of early marriage, forced by their families.
Right.
What kinds of things would you recommend that we should be doing with that? Is that doing the right thing? And if not, what would you recommend instead?
No, it's a great question. And there are no right answers. I mean, I think what has to happen is education of the household. So to bring about change, yes, you start with the girl, and the parents have to see that there's value in that education. So they have to see that the girl can actually start earning wages at a higher level, and often it's the economic value that changes them, that pulls them around. And unfortunately, that's what they see, but you know, they probably are not very well educated, if have any education at all. And so it's going to be the economic value that they will see, that they will turn them around. So whether or not it's maybe trying to get the girls to get involved in some sort of work alongside school, sort of a work-study program, so that they can see that because they have some education, they actually can create economic value that will help their families. And maybe that will help change their thinking a little bit. But it is, you have to focus on the larger unit, not just the girl, to bring about cultural change. I mean, I know that's really, really hard. And there are other methods too, so I'm just throwing one out at you. So, yeah, but yeah, good luck on that one too. I don't know where the microphones went, but...
Hello. Hello.
Oh, okay.
Good evening.
Oh, thanks. So there's on both sides, I guess.
How do you deal with the issues and the backlash of paternalism, given that throughout history we've seen many attempts by Western developed society to dictate life in lesser developed countries, and we've seen many of these attempts fail? Okay.
That's a very good question. So I think you're getting at sort of, you know, Westerners going inside and trying to change the culture. Is that what you mean? Okay. So cultural imperialism, right? So, you know, I'm actually all for it. I mean, this sounds horrific, but in the sense that I know, this is horrific. In the sense, in this sense, that if you see something that is so offensive to your person, to you as a human being, to your human rights, then really, you should speak up. Right? Whether it's something that happens in another country or in your own country, you should speak out. The question is how you do that. And that's where the trick is. So for instance, you know, some practices are really offensive. My grandmother's feet were bound. And I have to say that is probably, you know, China was probably one of the worst places to be born female 100 years ago. I mean, for centuries they had binding women's feet. Horrific. I don't know if you know, the foot actually grows, it actually, you know, the bone snaps. It's horrific. And yet, what happened was there were some foreigners who saw this practice and said, this is horrific. This is, you know, the missionaries were saying, we got to change it, this is just awful. But they knew that they can't just go out and say, well, you've got to change this. What they did was they hooked up with some of the intellectual leaders in China to convince them to start voicing their opinions on their, you know, criticisms of the issue, and they started working on communities. They started educating communities so that the entire community, because what happens is that the reason girls, you know, had the feet were bound was that then they were sure to be married off. So then you had to go to the potentially, the families who had potential, you know, grooms to marry these girls and convince those families that it was okay for them to marry, for the sons to marry girls who didn't have their feet bound. So it had to be a community effort. And so, and it had to be local people educating the local communities, not Western missionaries educating the local communities. So that's the way you have to do it. You have to work through the local people, because they're going to be the ones who know how to do this. I mean, chances are that if there's a practice that is so offensive to you, there are some people in that local community who also think it's very offensive, but they just don't have, they wouldn't dare, you know, stand up against it. And so, you know, for like genital cutting, for instance, there is actual change. I mean, for the longest time, Westerners were trying to figure out how to help, you know, people eradicate this practice. And, you know, there was a group for a while we were like, you know, it's not our, you know, it's not our culture, it's let them do what they want. But no, it really is pretty horrific. Finally, this group called Tostan, and in fact, a lot of countries had passed laws banning it, but no one paid attention to the laws because in practice it still, no one changed the practice. Then there was this group called Tostan, which we refer to in the book, Molly Melching. She was amazing, what she did, and she had some mistakes too. She has been able to successfully convert, community by community, people to end that practice. But she had some mistakes along the way, but that's how she's doing it. And she's working with local people. She's not the one going in there and saying change it. So thanks for that question, too.
Hi. My question is kind of a specific. I moved from my country. I'm right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
To the other side.
Okay, got it.
To the other side.
Okay.
Right here.
Back and forth.
I was born in Chile, and I had been living here for 10 years. And I recall the professional world being dominated by males. Now it's changing. But I was just wondering, how are your statistics on the Hispanic community?
On the Hispanic community.
Yes,
you know, we haven't ourselves done a lot of research on that community. So, you know, I can't say that I have some really good statistics on that. I'm sure there are a lot of, you know, academics at universities that are even here probably who have done some research on that. And so I'm sure there is some research being done on that. But, you know, I found that there hasn't been, I mean, the really horrific things. Maternal mortality is not as huge an issue there in Latin America or Central America, and neither is, I mean, I say sex trafficking, but, you know, to a degree it goes on everywhere, but, you know, not to the degree that it has in some of the other areas that we've talked about. But, of course, there are other challenges, so, but we just, you know, we just don't know as much about that area.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess that's a good thing because it doesn't stand out.
Hi. I was wondering, I think it's true that some of the places in the world that need the most help are also the most dangerous. So I was wondering, how are you able to travel to all these places, and thankfully you've been able to stay safe. And I know when I read your book, you spoke of how important it is to actually go there to somewhere where you want to help. And so do you have any recommendations on how we manage that? Well,
right. Well, I mean, going to places like Darfur in Afghanistan is very, very hard. But, you know, there are so many places in the world that are actually, you know, probably safer than some of the areas in the U.S. You know, going to places in Southeast Asia, you know, Cambodia, Vietnam, those are not dangerous places for foreigners. But then again, you know, obviously you can't just, you know, you have to be careful when you go out anywhere. You know, it's better to go with an organization, with a group of people who have a network, you know, whether it's a, you know, local organization that has a network that has worked with foreigners before, or a foreign organization, a global organization that has a local presence in a particular country that you're interested in, and work through them, because, you know, it is important to be able to see this, but, you know, you really have to be careful in terms of security, because that really is an important issue. It's like the last thing you want to do is have something happen to you. So that's why I would say just, you know, exercise some caution, but really try, instead of, you know, gee, it would be nice if instead of going to Paris, you go to, you know, Phnom Penh or someplace in China or something like that. So hope you find a safe place to go to. So now it's going to hop over here, right?
So what you're talking about is awesome and sounds really great. And I agree, education and then joining the workforce is just wonderful for women. But what about areas where culturally it's unacceptable for women to work? And how can those women be empowered, be protected from things like marriages at 11, 12, 13, sex trafficking, all these things, while still living in the culture that they live in that may not be changed for a few generations?
Well, you know, that's what we said about, you know, places in rural China and some of these places that we visited. You know, this is never going to change for generations. But, you know, it has to start somewhere. And there is change in a number of these countries. And, you know, I don't know which in particular country you're thinking about. Are you particularly thinking about a country? In the Right. Right, and those places are actually changing, believe it or not. I mean, there are lots of places where it's not, but it's just changed enormously from the past. So in Saudi Arabia now, there are a lot more women who are, first of all, the government employs women. It's just in the corporations, the private corporations, where women are having more difficulty. But now there are schools. In fact, in Saudi Arabia, what's remarkable is that there are more women, I think more than 50% of the people enrolled in college are women. And so it's actually important to educate the men too, because then you want them to understand that they should be working alongside women when they all graduate. So it's changing. Change is coming about. It's just that it's slow, but it is coming about. And in a place like India, there is an enormous amount of change going on. But it's 1 billion people, so it is going to take time. And, you know, it is going to take time. But hopefully, you know, there are so many organizations that are now working in India focused on some of these issues, you know, from sex trafficking to just, you know, maternal health to, you know, eradicating things like child marriages and, you know, burning women, you know, because their husbands have died or they've committed something, have been raped, or, I mean, some of these practices are just horrific. So there is work being done to educate the communities to bring about change. In fact, one of the most interesting things, there are a couple of things that are actually very interesting with India that can help bring about change. In the rural communities, they find that when they're now beginning to elect a lot of women to the heads of these villages. And that's important because women, they've found, when they run a village, they actually tend to focus more on social services. So people like that. So they become role models. And so there is that going on. Also in India, I think probably the most effective tool to bring about cultural change and change in cultural attitudes is, believe it or not, the television. It's soap operas. I know this is shocking, but they did a study that showed that when you brought soap operas, you had, you know, communities in India watching soap operas, they started realizing, look at these women. They're walking out of the house, you know, they're working, they're dressing nicely. I mean, they have money that they can actually go, that they earn themselves. I mean, it was just an eye-opener, and all of a sudden you had attitudes towards women changing because they were seeing what was going on in the rest of the world. And so I think the key is to start, you know, let's develop some new soap operas that will change the world.
Hi, I'm in the middle.
Okay.
My question is about if you've gone somewhere and you're trying to make change from the U.S., how do you practically, how do you do that with a country that has little infrastructure or no internet and therefore little accountability with people that you're sending, you know, $50 to pay for a school fee? How do you ensure that from the U.S. going elsewhere?
Yeah, there are organizations who are delivering that. So,
but if you're trying to do it yourself.
Oh, if you want to do it yourself, then, well, you know, you got to like, take a plane and, if you want to set up your own organization, you mean?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I actually haven't set up my own organization, and the reason I haven't is because there's so many great organizations around that I didn't think that was my expertise. So, so I don't really know. You probably couldn't talk to one of the, people who have run their own NGOs and see what it takes to start one. But first of all, you'd have to go visit the place and see what needs there are, and then figure out, you know, maybe partner with a local group, because I think, you know, you have to really work with a local group. I think it's hard for, you know, Westerner just to go out there and do something from far away. You do need a local partner. As to the internet, I mean, I just really think that in a lot of these places there is no internet, and there probably won't be for a while, but what there is mobile phones. And so there is an enormous amount you can do with the mobile phone. I mean, that is the next a major tool in the developing world. In Kenya, I was in Kenya a couple months ago, and we don't even do it here. We don't even do banking by cell phone. But in Kenya, they are doing banking by cell phone. They're doing mobile banking in the rural areas because that's where it's required. I mean, it's just incredible the kind of technology that is being developed. And it was because they had a very, very sympathetic central bank, because there was a telecommunications company that said, you know, we'd like to try mobile banking. They brought their proposal to the central bank, and the central bank said, that sounds pretty interesting. And so the central bank let them do this mobile banking, and it is just taking off. And what it is enabling is women in the rural areas to do banking transactions, because most people in the rural areas will never set foot in a bank. Never. So if they have a mobile phone where they can actually send money, receive money, save money, then, you know, they can do a lot, and it's really helped the local economy. So that's one area that would really be a growth area.
I think we have time for one last question.
You want to choose? Okay. Okay, here, you've been raising your hand a lot.
I agree. Changing one person or one village at a time is important. But on the question of sex trafficking, I wonder what you would recommend as the most effective way of dealing with it, economically or diplomatically, sort of from the top-down approach.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a tough problem. I really think that one of the most successful tools for sex trafficking, for taming that, has been something called the TIP report. Have you ever heard of the TIP report? The Trafficking in Persons report. It's a report that the State Department requires of all these countries, and if you don't do well on the TIP report, in other words, if you have a lot of trafficking in persons, then you face possible sanctions, economic sanctions with the US. So a lot of these, certainly in Southeast Asia, boy, they don't want to sacrifice, trade possibilities with the US, so they've been trying to crack down. And what it really shows is that these are businesses. Sex trafficking is run by traffickers who are in it for the money. And so when you think about what that means, you can actually get at the incentive structure. And so, for instance, like this brothel that my husband had been visiting, not as a patron. I mean, he'd been doing interviews over the years. But the last time we were there together, the woman explained, she goes, they're cracking down so hard on the policemen so that now I have to pay them such high bribe prices because it's really risky for them. So the price of the bribes has gone up. And then she said, it got so expensive, it wasn't profitable, so she shut down her brothel and now runs a grocery store. So you've got to change the incentive structure on a scale, large scale. So thanks very much. Thank you very, very much.